Hi, folks. As you join us, please hold tight for a couple of minutes. We will be starting the meeting promptly at noon. Welcome to folks who've just signed on. We're going to wait a couple of minutes and we will start right at noon. Thank you. Thank you to folks who continue to sign on. We've got one more minute until our noon start time. Okay, it's 12 o'clock, so I think we'll get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the I-95 Greenwich Planning and Environmental Linkage Study. Our first virtual public meeting. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marianne Hull. I'm the public engagement lead for the study. Today's meeting will include the pre-recorded presentation that was used at last night's in-person meeting with a question and answer session following the presentation. Before we get started, I'll orient you to some of the features of this Zoom platform. If you are having audio difficulties, you are able to call in to this webinar as well as participating on screen. To call into the meeting, call the number 309-205-3325. The webinar ID is 847-1444-9908 and enter the passcode 993247. If that information hasn't been on the screen long enough, or if you're having other technical difficulties, please feel free to email us at info@i95greenwich.com or call or text our project hotline at 203 806 0804. And we have folks staffing both the email and the hotline, and they will be able to help you. So you can also view captions and subtitles in Zoom. So you go to the bar at the bottom of the screen that's marked CC Show Captions, and click to view the live captions or subtitles. You may choose the language of the captions. So if you prefer to have this in Spanish or Haitian Creole, those opportunities are available to you as well. So finally, I did say that we will be having a question and answer session following the presentation. We will be taking written questions throughout the presentation. So also at the bottom of the screen, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom and submit a question at any point. And then we'll collect all of those questions after we've had a chance to answer all of the written questions that have been received during the call. We'll have a live discussion. So you'll be able to raise your hand to speak. And I'll give more instructions on how to do that following the presentation. So with that, I think we'll pull up the recorded presentation and be ready to go. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the first public information meeting for the I-95 Greenwich Planning and Environment Linkages Study. I'm Jonathan Dean of the Connecticut Department of Transportation and the I-95 Greenwich Study Project Manager. I'm pleased to be joined today by the full study team from the Connecticut Department of Transportation and the prime consultant, CDM Smith. No person shall, on the basis of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination in the development of this project. A recording of this presentation will be posted to CTDOT's YouTube channel after this event. Closed captioning, including non-English translation options, are available on Zoom and YouTube. The Connecticut Department of Transportation operates its programs and services without regard to race, color, and national origin in accordance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Any person who believes she or he has been aggrieved by any unlawful discriminatory practice under Title VI may file a complaint with CTDOT. For more information on CTDOT's Civil Rights Program and the procedures to file a complaint, contact the CTDOT Title VI Coordinator at 860-594-2169, TRS 711, deborah.goss@ct.gov, or visit our administrative office at 2800 Berlin Turnpike, Newington, Connecticut 06131. For more information, visit www.ct.gov/DOT. The complainant may file a complaint directly with the Federal Transit Administration by filing a complaint with the FTA Office of Civil Rights. Attention, Title VI Program Coordinator, East Building, 5th floor, TCR, 1200 New Jersey Avenue, Southeast, Washington, D.C. 20590. A complainant may file a complaint directly with the Federal Highway Administration by filing a complaint with the FHWA Office of Civil Rights. Attention, Title VI Program Coordinator, 8th floor, E81-105, 1200 New Jersey Ave, Southeast, Washington, D.C. 20590. We also have this information available in Spanish. For media inquiries, please reach out to CTDOT Office of Communications at the email shown here. This is the first public information meeting for the I-95 Greenwich Planning and Environment Linkages Study. One of the key benefits of the PEL process, which you will hear about later, is the opportunity to engage you early in the process to help us create the vision for this corridor and to develop the purpose and need for any future projects in this corridor. During this formal comment period, we are looking to better understand your day-to-day concerns when driving, walking, or riding on these corridors. We also need to know about your community resources and assets. Again, I am Jonathan Dean, the project manager. I am joined by Joe Belrose, the project engineer, Neil Patel, the principal engineer, and Michael Calabrese, the division chief of highway design. Our consultant team for this project is led by Becca Hall, the project manager, Krista Gooden, the deputy project manager, and Marion Hall, the public outreach lead. We also have FHI Studio, HMMH, and Ty and Bond providing support as part of the consultant team. In addition to myself, Marion Hull, the public outreach lead, Becca Hall, the consultant project manager, and Krista Gooden, the deputy project manager, are the speakers for tonight. The purpose of today's meeting is to explain the planning and environment linkages study process, benefits and outcomes, present the existing conditions in the study area, collect your feedback on the draft preliminary purpose and need, and then understand the concerns and ideas you have for your community. The agenda will begin with an introduction to the I-95 Greenwich Planning and Environment Linkages Study before providing an overview of the public engagement process. Then we will cover existing conditions in the study area, share the draft vision and goals, as well as the draft preliminary purpose and need, and provide an overview of the schedule and next steps. We will wrap up with some information on how you can engage and provide your feedback and comments. We'll now turn this over to Becca Hall.
Thank you, Jonathan. The I-95 Greenwich PEL study area begins at the New York state line and continues for approximately 7 miles where it ends in Stamford, just prior to exit 7. This I-95 corridor overlaps the adjacent I-95 Stamford PEL corridor in order to provide consistency between the two studies. Our study area is also looking at US Route 1, where we begin at the New York state line and continue 6 miles through the town of Greenwich and end at the Stamford line. In total, we are looking at 7 highway interchanges and many different structures, including the major bridge over the Mianus River. Looking at the background and how we got here, in April 2018, the I-95 feasibility evaluation study was completed from Greenwich to New Haven. That study looked at the needs and deficiencies of the corridor and identified specific locations where further analysis and study could be needed. Moving forward, in April 2019, a strategic implementation plan was developed, looking at specific projects that could be initiated, as well as studies that should be moved forward. And that's how we got here today, to initiating this planning and environment linkages study. The study will build a locally based framework for projects moving forward. So before we get into specifics on the I-95 Greenwich PEL, we do want to provide an overview on what a planning and environment linkages, or PEL study, is. The PEL process was developed by the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA, to create efficiency in transportation planning and project development. The PEL process considers the environment, the community, and economic conditions, and it is intended to be a collaborative process for decision-making. This is achieved by ensuring local, state, and federal agencies, environmental resource agencies, like those who oversee environmental concerns, and the public work together early in the planning process. Now, let's talk about what the benefits are to doing a PEL study. The PEL process combines planning, engineering, and National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA-like activities. It encourages early, meaningful public engagement. Our intent is to provide clear messaging on the desired goals and outcomes of the PEL study. It also promotes environmental stewardship by engaging with the federal and state environmental resource agencies early in the process and identifying any potential environmental concerns and impacts prior to the formal federal environmental review phase called NEPA. It assists with project delivery by minimizing duplication, and finally reduces delays in implementation by expediting some of the NEPA-related activities and decision-making early on with FHWA. For example, this process will allow us to identify breakout projects that Connecticut DOT can take to begin addressing your concerns in the corridor that may not require a federal environmental review. So how do we get there? Following the initiation of a PEL study, we identify the transportation problems in the corridor using data. As part of this public meeting, we are hoping to hear from you to make sure that what the data tells us aligns with your day-to-day experiences. Next, we will develop the purpose and need with input from the public and agencies. As you will hear today, we have a draft. However, this is another place where we are looking for your feedback to make sure we are accurately reflecting the transportation needs in your area. Next, we will develop the concepts and evaluation criteria for how each concept will be evaluated or screened to determine if it meets the purpose and need you have helped us define. Based on evaluation criteria, we will screen the alternatives and then identify the range of reasonable alternatives. At the next public meeting, we will present those reasonable alternatives that address the purpose and need for your feedback. At the conclusion of the PEL process, we will prepare a final PEL study report. This will include the future projects that are needed in the corridor, along with recommended phasing for implementation. Here's a quick look at what happens once we finalize the PEL study. The individual projects identified in the PEL study action plan can then progress into the NEPA project development phase as funding becomes available. The NEPA phase is where we confirm or refine the purpose and need, conduct the detailed environmental studies and noise analysis, refine alternatives, explore mitigation and commitments, and prepare the decision document, all while having public and agency involvement, so you will have the opportunity to review and comment on those projects at that time. Project implementation includes the final design, right-of-way acquisition, permitting and mitigation, and construction. And finally, the maintenance of the roadway and right-of-way continues for the life of the facility. I will now turn this over to Marion to highlight our public engagement efforts.
Thank you, Becca. We're conducting proactive outreach to a broad range of audiences throughout this PEL study. We have met with each neighborhood association in the study area, as well as business groups, community service agencies, advocacy groups, and transportation planning agencies. We formed and are coordinating with a project advisory committee made up of community and public agency stakeholders. We've been engaging with the community at local events, and we're supplementing this community-based outreach with public meetings like the one we're having tonight, and an interactive survey, which is now live on the project website. We're also talking to policy stakeholders, including state and local elected officials and regulatory and funding agencies. A key audience is environmental justice communities, including populations with incomes below the median level, people for whom English is a second language, or who may have limited transportation access. When we take a look at our project advisory committee, you can see that this is drawn from a wide range of organizations and agencies, including service providers, neighborhood associations, advocacy groups, transportation providers, and the town itself. In terms of outreach activities to date, we're working to reach the broadest audience possible and have talked to more than 750 people to date at 13 stakeholder meetings, 4 project advisory committee meetings, and 9 community events. We have ongoing outreach to community-based service organizations, such as the town's libraries and Barbara's House, to help distribute information about the project. Prior to tonight, our primary interaction with the community has been through a series of pop-up events where the study team has attended community activities to meet people where they are and share information about the project and get feedback through interactive exercises and brief surveys. We've worked to reach diverse communities, attending everything from the Bruce Museum's birthday bash to Greenwich Community's block parties. Please let us know about future events that you think we should attend. So far, we've heard a lot about how special Greenwich is and the importance of protecting its assets. Specifically, we understand the importance of neighborhoods and community character, especially historic resources, parks, and trees. People are concerned about I-95 noise and air quality issues, traffic, roadway safety, and there is considerable interest in mobility improvements, not just for people in cars, but for pedestrians and bicyclists, and improved transit access and amenities, such as bus shelters. So with that, I'll turn this over to Becca to review the existing conditions in the study area.
Looking at the region and how we project forward to 2050, Connecticut and Fairfield County each anticipate a 9% anticipated population growth and a 17% employment growth. That information will inform the traffic volume projections. We will walk through the key pieces of analysis for the existing condition, starting with traffic, then moving to design, multimodal, and environmental. The traffic data was collected in the fall of 2022 in order to be consistent with the adjacent I-95 Stanford PEL study. In the fall of 2022, we collected turning movement counts at the signalized intersections along US Route 1, as well as at the ramp termini intersections. We also collected bidirectional traffic volume data on the I-95 mainline, as well as on the I-95 on and off ramps. What we've seen from this data is I-95 carries approximately 145,000 vehicles per day, and US Route 1 carries approximately 17,000 vehicles per day. While traffic levels dropped during COVID, data shows that the traffic has rebounded and returned to pre-pandemic levels, both for I-95 as well as US Route 1. One of the first steps in understanding traffic data is to see where people are headed. This graphic shows the travel patterns in the southbound direction during the weekday morning peak hour, which is the peak direction during the morning. Approximately 49% of trips start prior to Stanford and continue through into New York, with most of the people getting off at exit 3, which routes to key destinations such as Greenwich Avenue and the Greenwich train station. Then, looking at the reverse of that in the northbound direction during the weekday afternoon peak period, 58% of people continue along 95, beginning in New York and ending beyond Greenwich. And what we see here is that the most popular exits are the first two interchanges in Greenwich, exits 2 and exits 3. To understand existing traffic conditions, a VISM analysis was completed for the I-95 corridor. VISM is a micro-simulation traffic analysis software that simulates the transportation network, measuring the performance of individual vehicles as they travel through the system. These vehicles can be influenced by other vehicles, pedestrians and bicycles, roadway features, upstream and downstream traffic signals, and other factors. The measurement we are reporting on here and illustrated on the graphic is level of service. On I-95, level of service reflects the density, or the number of cars that you have along the corridor. Where there is green, that is level of service A through C. You have acceptable operating conditions. It's very similar to a report card. As you move down, operating conditions decrease, and you move to level of service F, where you have congested and very dense conditions. Looking at traffic during the week on I-95 in the weekday morning peak hour in the southbound direction, you have congestion with a level of service F around exit 6 in Stamford, continuing into exit 5, as well as some areas of friction and concern around exit 4. For the weekday morning peak hour, 19% of the study area experiences congestion going southbound with an average speed of 54 miles per hour. Going northbound, congestion is 2% with an average speed of 61 miles per hour. As we move to the weekday afternoon peak hour, what we're seeing is that the level of service degrades, with level of service in the northbound direction around exits 3, 4, 5, and 6, and similar patterns in the southbound direction. In the northbound direction, 74% of the area is congested with an average travel speed of 35 miles per hour. And going southbound, 19% is congested with an average travel speed of 52 miles per hour. We also looked at operations along US Route 1 to analyze intersections. Here we used a different program called Synchro, where we looked at the level of service, but here we measured it in terms of seconds of delay. At these signalized intersections in the weekday morning peak hour, there are 15 intersections with level of service E and F. Those are the areas with a significant delay. We conducted the same analysis for the PM peak hour. We see significant delay at 9 intersections in the weekday PM peak hour. But unlike I-95, the worst congestion on US Route 1 occurs in the weekday morning rather than the afternoon peak hour. The next set of information we looked at is safety data. Using the Yukon Crash Data Repository, we looked at crashes along I-95, including the ramps in the study area from 2018 through 2022. What we saw is there are about 2,800 crashes in this 5-year time span, about 1,500 northbound and 1,300 southbound, a fairly even split. Then we looked at the I-95 ramp and US Route 1 signalized intersections during the same time period from 2018 to 2022. And there were 911 total crashes, 351 of those at ramp intersections and 560 of those at US Route 1 intersections. Now we'll go into some detail about what types of crashes are happening in each of these areas. On the I-95 mainline and the ramps, we see about 1,800 rear end crashes, 600 side swipes, and 225 fixed objects. The rear end crashes can largely be attributed to the congestion that you saw in the traffic data and the level of service figures. There were also 3 wrong way crashes and 1 pedestrian involved crash. Looking at the I-95 ramp intersections, we transition to traffic signal controlled locations. Angle becomes the predominant crash type at 165, followed by 98 rear end crashes, 51 side swipe crashes, 2 crashes that involved a pedestrian, and 1 wrong way crash. On US Route 1, we have 228 angle, 218 rear end, and 60 side swipe crashes, illustrating the same patterns we saw at the I-95 signalized ramp intersections. In total, we saw 2 bicycle and 18 pedestrian involved crashes along US Route 1. These angle, rear end, and side swipes may be attributed to the signal operations, the signal phasing, the timing, and the overall delay that occurs along US Route 1 that you saw on the previous traffic slides. Moving on to the design considerations. We did a detailed analysis looking at the Connecticut Department of Transportation's highway design manuals controlling design criteria, and we looked at some of the design characteristics that can influence safety and mobility along I-95. Looking at the design of roads and bridges, we saw that 63% of shoulders are not wide enough, which means that there is not enough space for emergency vehicles to respond. 81% of bridges are not wide enough, 32% of bridges are not high enough, so large vehicles cannot go through. 34% of vertical curves do not provide sufficient stopping sight distance, which means that in a congested area, if you're coming around a curve, you cannot see the car stopped in front of you, and that can contribute to the rear end crashes we saw previously. And then 75% of on-ramps and 73% of off-ramps are not long enough. So what this means is that if you are getting off the exit, you're slowing down while you're still on the main line, which is contributing to congestion. And when you're trying to get on I-95, you don't have enough space to get up to speed and get up to the mainline speeds before you're merging onto the highway. So this causes some friction and congestion as well and can contribute to crashes. On US Route 1, the Connecticut Department of Transportation recognized the need to study many of the signalized intersections along US Route 1, as well as those at the I-95 ramps. We looked at approximately 20 signalized intersections, again, using the Connecticut Department of Transportation's controlling design criteria for our evaluation characteristics. These locations were selected either due to their high crash rate or due to their high volume of pedestrians or cyclists. The pictures on the right side illustrate some of the issues we documented. The top two pictures show the limited intersection sight distance at signalized intersections. Whether due to the storage of materials or overgrown vegetation, it impacts your ability to see when making turns. The picture in the lower left-hand corner shows an example of pedestrian facility deficiencies. In the picture in the lower left-hand corner shows a location just adjacent to I-95 exit 3 where there is no transit or not sufficient transit provisions provided for riders. Now moving into the multimodal existing conditions analysis. On US Route 1, we know there are a high number of pedestrians. We reviewed the existing pedestrian facilities and found 13 signalized crossings without crosswalks for each of the crossing locations. We saw that there's almost a mile of sidewalk continuity issues. This means that the sidewalk stops and there is a gap before it starts up again. Also, not all sidewalks are concrete. So as you see in the picture on the right, part of the sidewalk is asphalt. Additionally, there are 26 side street crossings without crosswalks. In review of some of the bicyclist concerns on US Route 1, we saw that there were no dedicated bike lanes, despite a portion of US Route 1 being part of the East Coast Greenway. And we also saw that there's only 3 cross streets that do have bike lanes, and the pavement markings for those are worn and deteriorated. There are many public transportation options available along this study area. There are 4 train stations in Greenwich. There's the Tramford Station, which is the largest in the state, with both Amtrak and Metro North service available. Many individuals use public transportation as 4.3% of people have no access to a vehicle. Lack of vehicle access occurs more often in census tracts near downtown Greenwich, as well as Stamford, and in communities with environmental justice concerns. Looking at bus ridership going back to 2020, we see that Route 311 Port Chester bus has almost 500,000 riders, which is the most heavily utilized route in the study area. We've seen a lot of recovery since pre-pandemic levels on the iBus Express 97 having almost doubled. Of the 59 bus stops along US Route 1, 42 only include signage with no accompanying features. A total of 11 of these bus stops include a shelter, and 6 include a bench, along with this existing signage. Looking at rail ridership, Greenwich has 4 stations, with Greenwich Station being the largest. When we look at how rail ridership has recovered in the study area, we see it is about 2/3% of recovery, which is very similar to what we're seeing in Stamford. I'll turn it over to Krista to walk through the environmental conditions.
Thanks, Becca. Early in the PEL process, our project team conducted an environmental scan to identify the social, natural, and cultural resources that may exist within the study area. The purpose of this environmental review is to identify those resources early in the planning process and to identify constraints and potential fatal flaw resource areas for use in the alternative evaluation process. For cultural resources, the team identified 216 historic properties and 2 cemeteries. There are also 18 communities with environmental justice concerns within the study area. This includes census block groups with a population majority that is minority, low income, and/or populations with limited English proficiency. There are 15 public parks and open spaces, as well as multiple streams, lakes, ponds, reservoirs, and harbors, and 3 areas known to have protected species. There are also several acres of overlap with the coastal zone, in addition to about 300 acres of floodplains and floodways, and almost 150 acres of wetlands. As part of the PEL study, our team is also conducting an existing noise assessment. The existing conditions noise assessment measures the existing noise conditions as well as identifies the sensitive receptor locations that exceed the noise criteria. Doing this will allow our team to understand what the current noise levels are along the I-95 portion of the study area and will help inform the project team when we move into the concept development phase of the PEL process. I would like to also point out what future noise assessment activities may be after the completion of the PEL study. If a project recommendation moves forward into the required environmental review process, it will be evaluated to determine if it meets Type 1 criteria in accordance with the Connecticut Department of Transportation noise policy. If it meets the Type 1 criteria, then the traffic noise model will be developed for build conditions and predicted impacts will be identified. If there are impacts, the noise assessment will determine if abatement or noise walls are feasible and reasonable where those impacts are found. And a quick note that Type 1 projects include construction of a new highway, additional traffic lanes, or projects that result in a substantial alteration of the horizontal or vertical alignment. The full definition can be found in Title 23 United States Code of Federal Regulations, Part 772. Here are the preliminary results of the existing conditions noise assessment. As a reminder, the short-term and long-term noise monitoring was conducted in March 2024. 1,598 residences within 500 feet of I-95 were analyzed for noise. 754 of those residences are predicted to experience noise levels that approach, meet, or exceed the noise abatement criteria. That equals about 47% of all the residences analyzed within the study. Note that the noise abatement criteria of 67 decibels is the federal threshold for predicted impacts in the build condition. So one of the other components of the PEL study is developing a draft vision statement and PEL study goals. The vision and goals serve as the overarching desired function of the study corridor and how future improvements should fit within the community. The vision and goals integrate the public and stakeholder input that Marion and Becca described with the needs and priorities that may have been previously identified in local and regional transportation plans or studies. We then layer in the existing conditions analyses, including demographics, traffic and safety, roadway and bridge, and natural, social, and cultural resources conditions. So what is the study's vision? The I-95 and US Route 1 corridors will serve local, regional, and statewide travelers by balancing mobility and access considerations in a way that enhances safety for all users, provides multimodal and equitable transportation solutions, improves the reliability and resiliency of the transportation system, and reflects the community's character and needs. Here we have the study goals, which expand upon the vision. The study goals include expand multimodal options by improving bicycle, pedestrian, and transit facilities and connections, equity in transportation by providing equitable access and mobility for all users, environment by minimizing impacts to the natural and built environment, quality of life by enhancing livability, considering the effects on noise and air quality, mobility by enhancing the movement of people and goods, including transportation reliability and accessibility, and strategic alignment by aligning with regional and statewide transportation planning goals and strategies to improve economic vitality, accessibility, and mode choice. Now that we've talked about who is using this corridor, what are the conditions, and what type of transportation problems we are seeing, we've developed a preliminary purpose and needs statement for public and stakeholder input. So what exactly is a purpose and needs statement? The purpose and needs statement tells us the why the project or study is being conducted. It conveys the study area's vision and goals while incorporating the transportation issues and problems identified in the data collection and analyses. The purpose and needs statement is essentially the foundation of the decision-making process of the PEL study and future National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, analysis. The purpose of the transportation improvements along I-95 and US Route 1 is to increase regional mobility, multimodal access, and safety for the movement of people and goods. The needs for improvement are organized into two categories, operational deficiencies and design deficiencies. And we show these two categories for both the I-95 corridor and the US Route 1 corridor. So for the draft preliminary needs for I-95, we look at operations deficiencies. We consider issues that contribute to travel delays, including interchange spacing, traffic volumes, ramp lengths, and lane usage. Safety needs consider contributing factors to crashes, including rear end, side swipe, or fixed object crashes. And congestion issues are related to the volume to capacity as well as density of traffic. For design deficiencies, I-95 has insufficient acceleration and deceleration ramp lengths, substandard stopping sight distance, substandard shoulder widths and clear zone obstructions, and substandard bridge lane and bridge vertical clearance. For the draft preliminary needs for US Route 1, for operational deficiencies, we have also travel delays related to the signalized intersections, traffic volumes, as well as turn lanes, safety with crashes including rear end and side swipes and fixed object type crashes. We also see substandard pedestrian facilities related to sidewalk continuity, ramps, crosswalks, signals and lighting, as well as substandard bicycle facilities. And transit provisions such as bus stops, ADA compliance, and crosswalks. On the design deficiency side, we have insufficient signalized crossings, sidewalk and crosswalk continuity issues, insufficient bus stop amenities, a lack of bicycle infrastructure, as well as deteriorated and worn bicycle lane markings and signage. Now I'll hand it over to Becca to summarize the schedule and next steps.
Let's take a look at the overall study schedule. We began in June of 2023 with the initial stakeholder meetings. As Marian mentioned, we met with 13 different organizations, including neighborhood associations, business group, and service providers, and we learned a lot about the concerns and future visions for the corridor. This feedback really began shaping what this PEL study would look like and what the range of reasonable alternatives might look like in the future. Right now, we are wrapping up the identification of the transportation needs and deficiencies, and we have completed the draft purpose and needs statement, which is ready for your review. In 2025, we're going to develop the screening criteria based on that draft preliminary purpose and need, and that will help us identify those reasonable range of alternatives. The technical work paired with the ongoing public involvement will support the development of a draft and final PEL study document in mid-2026. So how can you engage with our team and have your voice heard? There are several ways for you to provide input. You can scan the QR code on your screen to take our survey, which includes a mapping component. You can visit our website at www.i95greenwich.com for project information, including all public meeting materials, or email us at info@i95greenwich.com. You can also send us a letter, fill out the comment form, or call us at the number listed on the screen, 203-806-0804. Whether you have specific concerns or general comments on the PEL study, we'd love to hear from you. The comment period on the draft vision and goals and the draft preliminary purpose and need is open through December 6th, 2024. We appreciate the time you're committing to the study, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Stay engaged with us on social media, sign up for emailed updates, and look forward to our next public meeting in 2025. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your time and attention to the presentation. We have a couple of questions in the queue, which I'll get to in just a moment, but I want to run through just a couple of reminders before we get going. We just want to make sure we have a friendly and productive meeting, so we ask folks to use respectful language and professional meeting approach. Please note that we will need to unmute you before you can ask a live question, and describe how we'll do that in a minute, and we'll also answer the written questions first as we receive them. If we start to receive a lot of questions that are very similar, we'll kind of group them together just to use everybody's time well. Also, a recording of the presentation will be available on the project website. So just a reminder on the Zoom Q&A. You can raise your hand to ask a question verbally. If you're having technical issues, email us or call us. Email it at us at info@95greenwich.com. You can enter your question there and it will be communicated to the team, or call or text 203-806-0804, and we can grab your question that way. So if you're participating by phone and you do not have the raise hand option, you can click star nine to let us know that you'd like to ask a question verbally. We'll unmute you after we've taken all the written questions. If you ask a question verbally, if you can please state and spell your full name when you begin, and limit any questions to no more than 2 minutes. So with that, we have at this point we have four questions in the queue. The first question is by Carolyn Schaefer, and she asks, "Are sound walls planned for I-95 Greenwich? If so, what are the landscape plans to mediate the appearance, sound reverberation, and overall feeling of driving? If no walls are planned, that is good." So, Becca, do you want to start an answer to this one?
I'll take this first question. Thank you. So currently, as you saw in the presentation, we completed an existing conditions noise assessment for data collection purposes. So once we move forward, we're really too early to identify, if noise walls will be constructed. Where the walls would be proposed really depends on the concepts and the projects that move forward. And as part of that moving forward, we will go through the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA phase, for any of those projects. And those will be evaluated based on to see if they meet the type 1 criteria. And then, the landscaping would be dependent on space available and the ability to maintain the landscaping in that area. And then the department also has new standards for noise walls that have less reverberation than timber walls currently in place. So really the answer is it's too early, and to stay tuned to come to some of our future meetings to see, what projects will come out of this PEL study.
Great, thank you, Becca. The second question we have is by Anthony Moore. He states that Connecticut has a new complete streets policy and design criteria. Certain towns have their own similar policies, but some, like Greenwich, do not yet. And he asks, how will you coordinate the design criteria and choices for bicycle and pedestrian improvements to work in concert with planned or existing multimodal infrastructure in Greenwich? I'm going to pass this to Jonathan Dean.
Great, thanks for that question. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the DOT does have a new or complete streets policy that really heightens the rigor that we go through to document our decisions with respect to including multimodal facilities in our project. So looking at bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities, transit as well, in all of our projects where those users are legally allowed. And in cases where we can't meet the criteria set out in the policy, we have to get formal sign off, similar from our senior leadership, similar manner that we do for our other kind of design related criteria. So that's a little bit of background. I think we'll be putting some info in the chat as well. So the question is, as far as coordinating those criteria and choices with the town, we have town officials on our project advisory committee. We work very closely with DPW and other folks within the town. So it's a back and forth conversation between us and the public and the town as we identify improvements. We'll have recommendations or potentially options of what types of multimodal improvements could be included in those transportation projects. So again, it'll be a conversation and we'll make sure that we understand any planned improvements, make sure we dovetail with the town's vision um, within Greenwich.
Thank you, Jonathan. Our next question on the screen is from Greg Piccanino, and his first question is: Do the findings indicate you are considering extending all on and off ramps? I'm assuming you are referring to all on and off ramps along I-95, and I'm going to send that question to Scott Harley.
Thanks, Marion. So from our initial analysis of all the acceleration and deceleration lanes between exit 2 and exit 6, a lot of them do not meet the minimum design lengths per Connecticut DOT's design criteria. So as we move into the concept development phase of this study, we will be looking at alternatives for what it would take to have each of these on and off ramps meet current design standards.
Thank you, Scott. The next question is also from Greg Piccanino, and he says that I understand a noise study was conducted. Where were the results released? If not, when can we expect that? And I'm going to send that to you, Becca.
Perfect, thank you. So the full report was not released yet. It will be released next year. However, if you go to our website and you go to our PAC meeting 3.5 presentation, you can see some detailed maps that show the locations where the noise criteria exceeded or approach the threshold.
Great, thank you, Becca. The next question is also from Greg Piccanino, and he asks, if noise walls are going to be constructed, would you look at the clear technology that is now being used in Europe? I'm going to ask Kim to answer that question.
Sure. Thank you for that question. We have used some portions of the clear noise wall on the Charter Oak Bridge. And I would say in general, that depends upon the location and what we're trying to achieve there. So that could be something that we could look into as the concepts and designs progress through what comes out of this PEL study.
Great, thanks, Kim. The next question is from Diane Cece. She says, good afternoon. This is Diane Cece, East Norwalk Neighborhood Board President. Oh, and my screen just flipped. There we go. This question is outside the scope of today's presentation, but related. Was a PEL study conducted for the Norwalk area, exits 13 through 17 and US Route 1? If not, is one scheduled for this area? And if not, why not? And Jonathan, are you prepared to take that one, or is that something we're going to need to follow up on?
I can take that, Mrs. Neal.
Oh, great. Sorry, Neil. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best. I'm a little bit under the weather, but I will try. So yeah, PEL study was not conducted for the Norwalk section there. Exits 13 to 17. At this time, there is not a PEL study scheduled for that section. It was identified, exits 15, 16 were identified in the I-95 study that looked at operations from the state line all the way to New Haven. And it was identified as an area that does need further long-term improvements. So nothing scheduled at this point, but it is definitely identified as a major bottleneck, especially for operations.
Thanks, Neil. Okay, the next question is from Paul Chenard, and he asks, are protected bicycle lanes and or cycle tracks part of the bicycle infrastructure program along the Route 1 corridor? And Becca, can you take this?
Yes, great. Thank you for that question. So currently for the I-95 Greenwich PEL study, we're in the existing conditions phase. So we're looking to see what facilities aren't out there. And as we move forward, we're going to be looking at potential improvements and projects that we could construct. So, that will definitely be a tool in our toolbox that we'll look at and evaluate the reasonableness and feasibility of those.
Thanks, Becca. The next question is from Jeff Eng, and he asks, is there a detailed noise study available? And I think we've discussed that some. We can follow up on that. And then also, how are type 1 project areas determined? Becca, do you want to start that one?
I think, Kim, I'll give the identification of a type 1 project over to you to respond to.
Yes.
Sure. Type 1 projects, I think we touched on this a little bit in the presentation. However, we can put a link to our noise policy in there. That again is typically new highways, lane additions, things like new rest stops, new way stations, or if there's, a widening that brings you, a certain distance closer to a sensitive noise receptor. So that's kind of the short and sweet version. But if you really want to see the language for that is in our noise policy.
Great, thank you, Kimberly. And then Chantal Duteau asks, my neighborhood is in Greenwich at the very junction where the Stanford project ends. They are getting a lot of remediation. Why not us? And I believe, Chantal, you were referring to the noise walls that are being planned for there. She says, my son has asthma, the air quality in this area is poor, and the noise is excessive. The DOT study indicates that my area is over the limit. Why isn't the health of my neighborhood being considered here? And I believe that the base of the answer there is that there's a type 1 project happening, and in that area. Either Kim or Jonathan, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So yeah, there's a separate project, separate from the paving project, and this PEL study, a auxiliary lane project, as we call them, in Stamford between exits 6 and 7. So that project is extending the on and off ramps between the closely spaced exit 6 and 7 ramps. And so that does qualify as a type 1 project. And that study that was done did indicate that the abatement there, the sound barrier was warranted on a portion of that project. So again, as our PEL process that we're going to undertake, as we identify projects, we will have a similar process where the determination is made, is it a type 1 project? And if so, it will undergo the same study that project in Stanford underwent.
Thanks, Jonathan. Also, I just want to note we have skipped some questions. That's because they're appearing in the chat, so they're not coming up for us to see. So please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A so that we find them. Here's one that we did skip. I'm going to come back to it here. In addition to noise walls, are there other additional tools available to reduce significant noise pollution experienced anywhere near I-95? Kim, do you want to take that?
Sure, I can take that one, Marion. Thank you. There are some other proven effective methodologies to utilize. Those include berms and wider swaths of vegetation. However, I'm sure everyone on here is very familiar with, we do not have an awful lot of right of way out in this area, so that may be challenging. But those will be things that we look at as the study moves forward. Also, the engineering team, is looking at options with the pavement mix as well. And we'll also be, looking at any new technology that emerges as the study goes forward.
Thank you, Kim. And there was a request to please post the link, the web link to the study referenced on your website that shows the noise study results, and that link has been posted. So that's the presentation for the PAC meeting 3.5 that summarizes the initial results from that noise study. So Janice Stahlhut asks, do you anticipate any need for taking of private property in order to widen or in any other way overbuild new roadway facilities? And Becca, do you want to start that question?
Yeah, I can take this one. So at this point, we really are just gathering that existing data. So when we go into the identification of potential concepts, that's one of the pieces of information that we're going to be looking at. So would any right-of-way acquisition in the form of easements be, required?
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is from William O'Neill, and he asks, the average rush hour speeds that we shared, excuse me, things are jumping around here, do not seem to be what I am experiencing. Could that be because your averages include COVID years data? Should the analysis include those years to reflect current reality? And Becca, I know you've addressed this question in other
Yep.
forums.
Sounds good. Thank you. So our traffic data was collected in the fall of 2022, and we compared these traffic volumes and the data that we did collect in that fall of 2022 with the pre-COVID years. And we're able to comfortably say that the traffic volumes had rebounded and they are consistent with what is going on today. So we're very comfortable that, they are matching and had rebounded since COVID, but it is something that we do look at.
Thank you, Becca. And then Diane CC asks, you may have answered already, but when will today's webinar video and Q&A be posted on your website? And they should be posted by later this week. Sarah Abercrombie asks, if there is no type 1 project identified, does that mean no noise walls? And Kim, I'm going to ask you to take that question.
Sure, thank you for that question. It would mean that there would be no noise walls that would qualify under type 1. There are 2 other types of noise programs, type 2, which the state just did finish our initial study. That is available on our Conduct noise website. And however, that is unfunded at the moment. And then we also have a type 3 program that we are undertaking where we are updating older noise walls that are in need of replacement.
Thank you, Kim. The next question is from Derek Rosenthal, and he asks, did the new pavement make any difference? It is hard to tell as a resident. Jonathan, can you take that one?
Sure. So the pavement that's currently most recently put down out there is not the final surface. So this is an intermediate course. The SMA stone matrix asphalt is going to be completed probably next year. So it's not the final surface yet.
Thanks, Jonathan. The next question is from Angelo Bocenas. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. He says he serves as the executive on the executive committee of People Friendly Stamford, an advocacy group in Stamford focused on improving walkability, bikeability, and transit service in the city. He also serves on the PAC of the I-95 Stamford PEL. He strongly believes that the only way to improve service levels on I-95 and Route 1 in the area to improve them is to improve transit infrastructure that would aid in alternatives to driving in these areas. Will this I-95 PEL study examine the potential impact of transit improvements, such as improved bus and train service in the area on vehicular traffic in these corridors? Also, will it examine the potential impact of improved pedestrian and cycling infrastructure on vehicular traffic on these corridors? And Becca, if you could please answer that.
Thanks. And I just want to start, Angelo, by thanking you for being involved on that I-95 Stamford PAC. That's very, it's a very important project as is this one. And so we are going to be looking further into transit data and be looking at potential improvements to both rail as well as bus. So that's part of the phase 2 that we'll be moving into next year as part of this project. And then also looking at improvements for both pedestrian and bicycling infrastructure along these corridors. And just a plug for actually our survey that we have going on now, it includes a mapping component. So if everyone on the call could visit our and they'll drop it in the chat, visit our survey, visit that mapping tool, and put any specific locations where you can see an opportunity for improvement, either for those transit facilities or the pedestrian and cycling infrastructure that you'd like to see for 95 as well as Route 1.
Great, thanks, Becca. The next question is from Paul Chenard. He asked, will traffic calming be looked at as a part of the Route 1 review? Traffic speeds are high along the corridor, making it not pleasant to walk or bike along Route 1. Becca, can you take this question?
Yes, so as part of this PEL study, the department really recognized the importance to look at Route 1 as well as 95, since when there is an incident on 95, Route 1 is the diversionary route that many people use. So we will be looking at concepts and improvements that can be made to improve safety along US Route 1.
Great, thank you, Becca. The next question is from Anthony Moore, who says, clearly some potential improvements will take a lot of time to finalize and prioritize, for instance, lengthening off-ramps. But others, such as striping bike lanes, could be done with a bucket of paint and a painter. Will you be phasing in potential improvements incrementally, even as you finalize others? And might you prioritize quick turn, higher impact, less extensive projects on a rolling basis rather than waiting for a mid-2026 study completion? Becca, I'm going to give this one to you.
Perfect, thank you. So yes, as we move into the next phase of the project, one of the very first things we're going to be doing is to look to see if there are any breakout projects or quick win projects that we can get on the street before this study is finalized in mid-2026. So that's definitely something we're going to be looking at doing, and then phasing all of the other solutions into short-term, mid-term, as well as long-term solutions for the corridor.
Thanks, Becca. Okay,
Can
the
I
next
just add
question.
on? Sorry,
Go ahead.
that was
Please.
great answer, Becca. But I do just want to mention that the department does have a relatively new quick build policy where municipalities can apply to try out kind of what's called tactical urbanism, for those that aren't familiar. But some of those kind of not quite roller and paint, but kind of low impact projects to implement traffic calming measures and the like. So that's not something that we would implement ourselves, but again, that would be something that the municipalities can also apply to do on our roads.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's good additional information. Okay, so the next question is from Derek Rosenthal, and he asks, if the study results in a recommendation to build noise walls, what is the approximate timeline for that to be constructed? Becca, do you want to start this one?
Yes, I can start this one. So at this point, we don't have proposed timelines for when those projects will be. It depends what the type of one project is that comes out of the PEL study. It could be a midterm, a long-term project. So, that's something at this time we do not have an answer for, unfortunately.
Great, thank you. And the next question is from Angelo Bochanis, and thank you for the pronunciation help there, Angelo. Does the study area for Route 1 extend into Stamford? And if so, how far? I saw some material on the website that indicates it might. The area close to the Greenwich border currently has wide crossing distances, no bike infrastructure, and insufficient transit stop infrastructure, creating safety and accessibility issues, which the study could help fix. I will say that the Greenwich study does not extend into Stamford along Route 1. There is a small extension up to just before exit 7 on 95, but not on Route 1. Although there is, as you well know, Anthony, the Stamford PEL that is going on. Okay, so Diane Cece asked a follow-up question related to future noise attenuating pavement for Greenwich. And she asks, is the new SMA stone asphalt being utilized currently for the final surfaces on I-95 in the Norwalk area? And if not, why? Jonathan, can you start with that one?
I can try to, I'll answer that first.
Okay.
If you want to add anything. No, the new SMA is not being used in Norwalk. That project was bid say like 2022, I believe, and that mix was not available at that time. And that project is also in construction and wrapping up, I think, probably another year or less. So yeah, it's not being used on that project.
Thank you, Neil. And Diane CC asks, will your study include recommendations for reducing tractor trailers on I-95, including collaborating with current and future rail and barge services? Becca, do you want to start that answer?
I think, Krista, we'll give this one over to you to respond to.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So, one of the things that we'll be looking at is we have some initial numbers on like the percentage of trucks in our traffic analysis, but right now we're not currently collaborating with the current rail and barge services, but also looking at opportunities for all the modes that are using the I-95 corridor.
Okay. I do not currently have another question in the Q&A. And I'm looking through the chat to make sure there aren't any other questions we missed in the chat. Oh, William O'Neill asked, can you use Google Maps rush hour travel times to validate your rush hour travel times?
So I'll ask Josh to talk about how the model was developed and how the travel times were validated.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that question. So we use a variety of different sources to validate our travel times. We like to use big data using a service called INRIX, which takes into account a lot of information that we get from cell phones and other roadway sensor data to collect and get a good sense for what travel times are. That provides a pretty broad and detailed measure in terms of performance, and that's on different hours of the day. We also do use other services such as Google Maps and others to kind of validate and confirm those travel times.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Let's see, I do not currently have a question in any of the Q&A, but I see that Vin DeMarco has his hand up. And Baylin, are you able to unmute Vin? It doesn't look like I can.
Okay, now I think I have it.
Great.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Vin.
Okay, thank you so much. This is great. Much more detail, I think, than I got last night. I probably just didn't ask anybody the right questions. So a couple of people have asked already about the possibility of bike lanes along Route 1. And as we all know, I think the study group is going to find out that we just don't have the lane width unless we start taking property away along Route 1. So to the degree that pedestrian activity slows traffic on Route 1, how would that influence the DOT to consider the feasibility and permission to utilize a portion of the I-95 row to create an off-road multi-use path?
John, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah. So the question is using our right of way for a multi-use path. Yeah, I guess we couldn't rule that out at this point. That's good feedback. Not something that I had really considered to this point, but
yeah, I guess
appreciate the suggestion.
So my question, I guess it leads to the fact that we just don't have the the town itself doesn't have the space to be able to create a facility like that. Right now, the East Coast Greenway is all on road, And so the natural thing would be to look for space. And if the DOT really feels that, you know, the residents, the public really want that kind of a facility, there's demand for it. And it's good for all of the other reasons of alleviating backups on Route 1, which spill over to people using I-95 as an alternative. This is another alternative that could be examined, explored. And so it's another, besides 95 and Route 1, it would be another facility.
Okay. Yeah, great. No, appreciate that comment. And you know, again, we're just at such an early data gathering phase right now. We're not really able to tell you for certainty what concepts we're looking at, but I think that's something that we could potentially look at as we move forward.
Great. Thank you.
Great, thanks. We have another question in the Q&A, this time from Susan Foster, who asked, why wasn't a noise monitor placed on Lockwood Lane opposite the J House noise barrier? A Riverside Association has repeatedly requested that location. And Bob, I'm going to turn this one to you.
Ooh, sorry for that delay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the reason why there was a measurement site not located across from the J House is because the measurements are actually utilized to calibrate the noise model and not to provide predicted noise levels or potential impacts. The area that was actually next to the J House had a measurement site because it was a much better area for getting noise levels that could calibrate the model effectively. However, the predicted noise levels that are at the receptors across from the J House did show that there was exceedances of the NAC, and that's truly what we're trying to accomplish with this existing conditions noise analysis.
Thanks, Bob. Jeff Eng asks, perhaps there could be consideration of removing Route 1 parking to allow for better biking and better transit. Becca, do you want to take this one?
I think, Jeff, that's a great suggestion that we'll note and make sure we consider and evaluate when we identify concepts. Thank you.
Thanks. Jenny Larkin asks if we were going to put a link to the survey in the chat. I know that there is at least one in the chat. She found it. I was going to say we'll add another to make it easy to find because there's quite a bit in the chat, but it looks like Jenny found it. So, okay, great. And then we have a question from William O'Neill. Hopefully I-95 exit 5 will be given special focus since it affects both Route 1 and I-95 and is such an unusual intersection. Not sure that is a question, but a comment, and definitely something that we're very aware of. Thank you, William. Let's see. So Susan asked a follow-up question on noise. Why no noise monitor in the Eastern Middle School fields, 1 mile as the crow flies from 95? And again, Bob, I'm going to ask you to take this question.
Sure. So the 1 mile would be farther than the project limits for the noise study. We typically like to analyze noise within about 500 feet of the corridor. So although there is potentially traffic noise in that area, it's most likely not the majority from I-95.
Thanks, Bob. Mm-hmm. Let's see, it looks like we have another last question in the chat from Catherine Drake, who asks, on I-95 South in Byram, adjacent to exit 2, the frontage road exit, are there plans to build a sound barrier wall along this stretch to spare the residents noise pollution, especially at night when sleeping? Becca, do you want to start that one?
Yes. So at this point, there are no plans to build noise walls along that area of I-95 and Byram. However, we did mention if a type 1 project is identified, it will be evaluated under the National Environmental Policy Act to see if one is reasonable and feasible.
Great, thank you. I do not currently have anything in the Q&A or questions in the chat or hands raised. I believe Susan is disagreeing with the evaluation about noise at the fields, at the school fields.
Oh, sorry, Marion, did you want me to follow up on that?
I think
Sorry.
it's just a comment. I don't know if you have some technical perspective that you want to give on that, we'd be very welcome to hear.
Sure. Well, and thanks for the follow up, Susan. I didn't mean to say that the noise was not loud at your location. But what I meant to say, and maybe not well enough, was that we evaluate noise receptors within 500 feet of the I-95 corridor. Therefore, 1 mile away would not be included in this study. It might be included in another study closer to that, but the 500 feet is the evaluation distance that we typically use.
Thanks, Bob. Okay. Other questions? Alice, oh, sorry. One more question in the chat, and then I will go to Joseph Pecora. Allison Radson says traffic on Fridays on Route 1 and 95 is hideous all day. Then side roads all clog up due to Waze directions. Any suggestions?
I can take this one, Marion.
So,
So,
Becca, yeah.
as far as suggestions on how to encourage ways to reroute drivers, there is nothing that we can do, unfortunately, for that. But just knowing that, we are looking at both US Route 1 and I-95 in this study and hope to have, improvements to both breakout projects as well as other improvements to help improve safety and traffic in this area.
Great, thank you. And then Joseph Pecora had a question, and again, I'm not able to unmute him. Oh, there we go. You're unmuted, Joseph.
The New Lebanon school location, are there sound attenuation walls looking to go over there to help the sound from 95 affecting New Lebanon School and the residences along that area?
Bob, do you want to talk about the measurements that were taken there?
Sure. Thanks for that question. I'm maybe I misunderstood it. I don't think you were asking about measurements. You were asking whether or not there were noise barriers planned for the area in that school. And I think as covered earlier in this discussion, Becca talked about it, is that there are no noise barriers planned for construction as part of this project during this phase. However, that school and the recreational facilities around it are part of this study and have showed exceedances of the noise abatement criteria in the existing levels. So when and if this project moves into a type 1 project, barriers would most likely be evaluated at that location.
Thanks, Bob. And thanks, Greg, and others who've made comments in the Q&A. Just letting us know that you're happy that we're doing this meeting. We definitely appreciate the positive feedback. Susan Foster has another question about whether we're considering plexi barriers for the Mayanis Bridge. And Becca, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, so it's similar to, what Bob said. At this time, there are no noise walls proposed for these study area locations.
Okay. Vin, I see you have your hand up. And there we go. Thank you. Now you're unmuted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I might have done that by accident, but I did have another question though. And early in the slides, there was the talk about the congestion on 95, and it was like percentages like 48% in the AM southbound, 58% northbound. I think that's what it was. Well, I'm not sure that I heard in that analysis where there was talk about a lot of it going through to New York. But I don't know whether the analysis was real detailed in terms of you know, how much traffic would be alleviated if more of those drivers took transit. There certainly is a lot of potential, you know, to get back to the transit levels that there were before. So I just wonder whether that analysis was had more detail to it.
So the traffic analysis that was completed so far did not look at a mode shift to transit, but that is something as part of the phase 2, we're going to do a deeper dive into the transit facilities, both rail and bus that are in this study area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. Susan Foster asks about, are we planning for the future apartment building growth in Riverside on Route 1, like what has occurred in Darien? So in terms of the future traffic levels in our modeling there. Becca, do you mind starting that one? You might want to.
Yeah. So we've coordinated with the town of Greenwich, with Port Chester, as well as Rye to identify any projects that they have approved through their planning and zoning departments or commissions. And if those were approved after we collected and constructed after we collected our data in the fall of 2022, then they were added to the future no-build traffic volume that we're going to be looking at. Also included in that future no-build traffic volume growth is an average growth rate that we expect the area to see based on the Connecticut Department of Transportation's statewide travel demand model. So we don't specifically include any future apartment buildings that aren't planned and approved by the communities yet, but we do plan to include future growth in the region based on Connecticut's statewide model.
Thank you, Becca. Okay, we don't currently have questions in the Q&A, and oh, we do have a hand up. Terry Adams.
Yes. Question: when we talk about the bike lanes on Route 1, do anybody keep a calculation of what's the use of bike on that corridor? I mean, because you go through the week, you may see 1 or 2 bikes the whole week. So, do anybody calculate the need and the expectancy of what the bike usage rate is going to be on those roads when people ask for protected lanes?
Okay, Becca, do you want to take this one?
Yep. So as part of the traffic volume counts that we completed, we counted vehicles, but we also counted pedestrians as well as cyclists. So what we can see is the current use. We do not have any type of projected demand that might occur if bike lanes are added.
So when you do current use for bike uses, is it a blind count? Do you just go out there on any particular day and do the count, not notifying the bike association that they decide to really use that road that day because they're doing a count? I mean, is it I guess a spontaneous count on the road that you're looking at, and a specific a random day? So you get a real count of what the bike uses are.
Yes, so that's what we did. When we collected all of our traffic count data in the fall of 2022, that did include the bicycle counts, and we didn't let anyone know that we, were doing it. We did coordinate with the town to make sure that they didn't have any road closures. We did let the police department know because there is equipment out there, so we wanted them to be aware. So, some people did know that our equipment was going to be out there and we were counting, but no, we did not coordinate with anybody in the bike community.
And I guess my next question is as people request bike lanes on public street, one of the things you don't see in most public park is bike lanes itself. I mean, we all share the circle that goes around most of the parks. Is there somebody addressing that at any level? That if you're going to put bike lanes on the public street, should be bike lane also in the parks?
So as part of the Connecticut Department of Transportation's new Complete Streets policy, all of their projects are evaluated for the applicability of bicycle facilities along their roadways. And then they make sure that, they are doing the best they can to provide connections to other, existing routes that the towns might have.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, we have another hand up. Anthony Moore.
Is it fair to say that, well, I should ask it this way. Is there any evidence that from around the United States, other urban, suburban areas, that bike usage increased on roads that have bike infrastructure?
I'm going to turn that over to you, Becca.
Yes, so there's not, Anthony, I haven't done that research myself, so I can't answer that question, but that's certainly something we can look into and consider.
Yeah. Is there evidence that increasing any transportation corridor and improving it increases the usage of it, whether it's bicycles or automobiles or anything else?
So that, again, that's research that, we haven't done, but we are, looking for all of our concepts here to be multimodal, to focus on pedestrians, bicycles, transit, as well as vehicles. So we are taking into consideration all modes of travel when we, look at what the concepts are, look at what the needs are, and, identify some potential improvements.
Sure. It's a leading question. I thought I gave you a softball, and I don't know that you interpreted that way. I think it's fair to say, and this is a comment, not a question, and I apologize if that's not appropriate, but one of the reasons you may not see a lot of people riding bicycles on Route 1 today is because it's not very friendly for people with bicycles. If you were to add the opportunity for people to ride a bicycle on Route 1, I think it goes axiomatically to the question of would people use it? And the answer is likely yes. It is one of our only east-west corridors in the entire county. And so if it were easier to use the road, you would be able to see more people using it. It's not fair to assess the potential value of a future improvement for something other than automobiles based upon current usage by those other modes of transportation.
Thank you, Anthony. And just one thing and one more thing, I know I plugged this before, but what's really important for that feedback, Anthony, and to help us support that is for people to take our survey. So to take the survey that talks about, do you bike along US Route 1? And if you don't, why not? Is it because you don't feel safe? Is it because of the volume? So provide that feedback to us, and then also take the survey component that includes the mapping tool where you can identify specific locations that you might like to bike along the study area in the future. So, that
Thanks.
would help.
That's terrific to know. Thank you very much.
And Janice Stallhut adds a comment that she knows bike lanes are always a challenge. And in her opinion, bike riding as a transportation alternative will never be safe unless bike lanes are separated from traffic. In countries and parts of the US who have successfully transitioned to a bike friendly culture, this tends to be the model. And perhaps specific bike stop go signals alongside pedestrian signals. And it's definitely clear that the more of a network you can build for alternative modes, the stronger the usage will be. Okay. I don't currently have any other questions in the chat or the Q&A or any other hands raised. Susan Foster says, thanks for the answers and efforts you're making on this project. Thank you. Um, we are at 1:31. If anybody has any closing questions, we'd be happy to take those. Joseph Pecora.
Getting back to the New Lebanon location at exit 2, if the noise level exceeds the health and safety of the children at the New Lebanon school, is it a conclusion or a foregone conclusion that sound walls would be put up there first before other locations?
Becca, do you want to start that?
I was going to ask Kim to
Or do you
start.
want,
this one
or
if
do you
you
want to
don't
have Kim
mind.
start that? Sorry.
Yeah, I think the answer is again that it's really too early to tell. As the team starts to talk about the universe of alternatives and starts to narrow that down to concepts, that's how this PEL process is meant to proceed. As far as if where noise walls are going to go in would depend on, again, if there's a type 1 project that's identified. So I would say that it's really just too early to tell.
Thank you, Kim. Nadeem Habra comments that living 1,500 feet from Route 1 and 2,500 feet from 95, there's plenty of traffic and highway noise. It varies with weather, atmospheric conditions, wind direction, time of year, and asks if we have taken these factors, also terrain, into consideration of the noise factor. And Bob, can you take this one?
Sure. So we use the FHWA approved traffic noise model, which is a digital software, and we evaluate the loudest hour of the day for an hourly average. Atmospheric conditions, wind direction, not so much. Time of year is calculated into that traffic, but terrain is certainly very important, and that is part of the 3D model that we use. So I hope that answered your question. So I think for the most part, yes, those factors are taken into account when we model for noise.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And then William O'Neill asks, is someone looking for ways to get through truck traffic off of I-95, such as improving other routes such as I-684 and I-84, since expanding I-95 seems unlikely? And Krista, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So the department actually has a freight plan that was completed in 2022 that did a analysis of the truck usage as far as the truck volumes along the major interstates in Connecticut, as well as a truck parking study. And so that information is in there. For this particular project, we'll look for opportunities to see what is needed and what's reasonable for the solutions, looking at all the modes on I-95. But right now, I don't really have an answer for that specifically about as having truckers change their routes to other interstates.
Okay. I do not see any more questions. I want to thank everyone for being here today and having a lively and engaging discussion. Please do go to our website and view the materials that are there and click on the link to the survey. Answer any survey questions that interest you there and show us specific areas of concern that you have on the interactive project map. And keep a lookout for us. We will be back with plenty more information in 2025.
Thank you.
Thank you all and have a great holiday season. I can't believe I'm saying that already.
Thank you.
Thanks all.